All right, all right. Hello, 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 everyone. And welcome back to day 2 of our launch of the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement known as CM3. I am your humble host, Dana McDaniel, and I'm excited to be here today to hear from some of our new guests and partners today. So this will be another exciting day, a bit of a deeper dive than yesterday, but definitely full of very important information. Be sure to go over to your chat, send us some welcomes, send us some shout outs. Hopefully you see some familiar faces. Let's be sure to show some love in the chat today. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to understand the history of CM3, how the work developed, but today we'll do a deeper dive into CM3, understanding what it is and how it works and how we can all stay attached to this movement. Please feel free to insert any questions or comments or suggestions in the shout outs. And even if we're not able to get your questions asked during today, we'll make sure to get back to you and provide any answers to any important questions you may put in the chat. As a start, I like, as we are beginning to get ourselves open for our intro, to please go into the chat and insert that one word you're feeling right now that really describes your involvement and attachment to the CM3 movement. I know for me, I feel very fulfilled today to just be a part of such a great movement, to have connected with so many familiar faces from yesterday. Super exciting. So we love to hear from you. Go to the chat. Let us know what's your word for today and your attachment to the CM3 movement. All right. At this time, I'd like to, as we did yesterday, we kind of start our day off with enlightening our energies and hearing some sentiments from some of our village leaders and elders. So if you guys don't mind, please open your hearts and minds as we welcome and receive 2 of my master teachers, the renowned Dr. Ivy Hilton and Baba Salim Hilton, for our opening remarks.
Okay, gee whiz. Thank you, Dana. Ivy, would you like to start with the comment?
Mama, you are on mute, Mama. It's all right. I can still hear you.
Joy right now. And I'm just so excited to be here and to see and witness all of this. And to look at all these beautiful faces, the ones that I can see that are in the Zoom. This is so exciting for me, and I'm certain for Baba Salim as well, because we've been doing this work in the city for so long, and with this vision of coming together in this way. And it is so beautiful to see how Clint came into our city, opened the door for this opportunity, and really with a very sweet heart, because what got me, what is that movie when they said, you got me at hello? Well, he got me at what does love look like in public policy. When I heard that, I almost fell to the floor. I said, oh my God, here we are. This is it. This is how we begin to do the real work. And I'm just so excited. I'm very grateful, and I am proud to say that we've been a part of this movement, and I cannot wait to see where it goes from here. Mama?
Well, I just want to first, I haven't had a chance to talk to Clinton in a while, but to first thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your magnificent work here in the District of Columbia. When you first came here and they had that gathering down at Youth Rehabilitation Services main office, I heard you speak. No, it was at a church, I believe it was, but I heard you speak. And I said, well, daggone, we finally got a savior here to help us take this youth movement a lot further than we have, because as Mama Ivy had mentioned, we have been working diligently in our community as well as other communities, but primarily to bring this balance and restorative justice practice into the youth or juvenile justice work. And excuse me, and Clinton came in with the ideas, the fresh thinking, the innovation, and commitment to the young people in general, not only the young people here in the District of Columbia, but he has such a commitment to help our young people. And it was just so refreshing to meet a young man like Clint Lacey. So I just want to say again, Clint, thank you for the opportunity. We have come so much further during the time that you were here, because we have been knocking on doors and twisting arms and whatever you want to call it, just to get people to understand what we were saying in terms of the phenomenal practice that this will bring into our juvenile justice community. And not only did you listen, but you had a background and a lot of experience in bringing our restorative justice work in DC. So when I worked with the Credible Messengers, that was quite an experience, because we had opportunities to interact with returning citizens to really get a sense of their brilliance and their insights and their awareness about what they could contribute to this kind of work. And that was quite an experience. So I thank you for that experience as well. But I could go on, but I just want to say I'm grateful and I'm honored to be a part of this conversation this afternoon. And we must continue to do all that we can to help these young people, because we're in very trying times with the amount of youth violence that's taking place in all the major cities in this country. So thank you all for who you are and what you all are bringing to this conversation, and the work must continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mama and Baba, for such a warm welcome. We do appreciate it, and we are so thrilled and honored to have you here as a part of this village. And you know I am personally tickled over being here.
We love you, Dana.
Thank you, Mom and Bob. I love
job
you.
too. So
Thank you.
carry on, my darling.
Thank you as I try to work through this blushing. Once again, before we jump into our experience, I want to make sure we shout out Sam, Sierra, Erica, and the entire Brand Print team for providing such a great platform for us to connect. We appreciate you as well. And I was looking through some quotes for a different assignment today, and I came across a leadership quote that I really love that I wanted to share with this group. And this quote comes from Nelson Mandela, and it says, "A leader is like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon the others follow, not realizing that all along they are being directed from behind." And this is what Clinton really represents for this movement: momentum, drive, unconditional leadership, providing opportunities for others to show their strengths and invest their strengths in this movement. So at this time, I'd like to hand it over to our esteemed leader, the CEO of the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement, CM3, another one of my teachers, Mr. Clinton Lacey.
Thank you so much, Dana, and thank you, Mama Ivy and Baba Salim, for that really beautiful opening and sharing of your thoughts and of yourselves. You have been such important leaders in the community, not just in DC, but nationally, and just very inspirational and supportive mentors to me and to my family. I love you. And, you know, I was listening to Dana and Mama Ivy and Baba Salim, and similar to the panel and to the collective audience, you know, it reminds me that I've never been the person who thought I was, or even ever wanted to be, the quote unquote smartest person in the room, right? But that I would just love to find and connect and listen to and grow under the knowledge and wisdom and understanding of others. And I'd love to be surrounded by brilliant people, by passionate people, by people who are committed, who have so much to teach and so much to share. And that's who we are collectively. That's who this audience is. That's who you are, Mama Ivy, Baba Salim. And that's who our panel is. We have a really awesome, distinguished panel with us today, and we're going to engage in a conversation, and certainly a group of people who have in various ways been and continue to be teachers to me, leaders, supporters, brothers and sisters in the struggle. And it's my honor to introduce them. They have long, illustrious careers and bios, which I hope the audience will take the time to read. In the interest of time, I'll give an abbreviated sense of them as I introduce them, and to engage in this conversation. So let's get started. I'd like to begin first by introducing Carol Mason, who was formerly, among many other things, the Assistant Attorney General under the Obama administration, and now is the president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City. Welcome, Carol. Thank you for joining us. I'd also like to introduce Stephen Bishop, who is a prominent leader in his own right now, but continuing to grow in his impact around the country, a former probation officer himself, now currently senior associate at the Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who's doing awesome work to advance transformative work in justice and in our society. So welcome, Stephen. I'd also like to introduce Candace Jones, who has been such a powerful force in this work and a powerful force in my life for sure. Somebody who has been so supportive and also informative to everything that we're trying to do. She's formerly the director of the Illinois State Department of Juvenile Justice and now president and CEO of the Public Welfare Foundation. So welcome, Candace. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce my my mentor among mentors, James Bell, who, by the way, it should be stated and repeated that my conversations and thoughts and introduction to this idea of love and public policy really came from James, who speaks about that, who's lived that, who talks about Martin Luther King's words and work, that justice, true justice is an act of love in public. I learned that, heard that first from James, and have been trying to push that forward. And so welcome, James. Thank you for being here with us as president and founder of the W. Hayward Burns Institute. So thank you so much for joining. I think we'll get right into our conversation. And I'd like to start with Carol, if I may. Carol, you know, given your background, just a little bit of which I have shared, and now your current position as president of John Jay College of Criminal Justice, of all institutions, who has such a focus on justice. I know that you've been involved in actually leading work of rethinking justice, rethinking public safety. Can you talk about that work and how it connects to, or in what way might it rely upon building community capacity or getting community involvement?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me into this conversation. And for those of you who don't know me, I'll be writing notes. So if you see me scribbling, I'm taking notes on the wisdom that's in this audience, this group here. And they have all been my teachers, and your teacher doesn't have to be older than you to be your teacher. We teach each other and we learn from each other. So I am excited to be part of this group. What Clinton was alluding to is a series of conversations that John Jay and the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives hosted last year. And our esteemed Candace Jones was one of our panelists in those conversations. So for those of you who don't know the history of John Jay, it was created back in the 60s to be a police college. And the thinking back then was that people had the foresight to think that law enforcement officers would be better partners with their communities if they had a liberal arts education and a strong educational foundation that was beyond policing. And so where we are 50 plus years later is John Jay is still renowned for putting out lots of law enforcement officers across the country, primarily NYPD, but they are also fierce advocates for justice. We are now 15,000 strong students majoring in all kinds of things who are focused on social justice issues and being fierce advocates for justice. So after George Floyd's killing last year and the continuing narrative about what's the role of policing, I thought as a Black woman president of what was originally a police college in partnership with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, that we had a responsibility to help lead our communities through this conversation and to find a solution. And I was confident that if we took things back to the question of what does public safety look like? What do we mean when we say public safety? What do we want with public safety? that we would get to consensus. One of my colleagues worried about whether we would get consensus, and we had political leaders, law enforcement leaders, union leaders, young advocates, older advocates, a whole range of people in this conversation, and we reached 9 points of consensus. But here's the thing that's most important for this group and this audience, and I know Candace will go into this in much more detail, but we all own public safety. Law enforcement does not own public safety. We collectively are what create public safety. And you heard them talking about what love looks like in public. That's all of our combined responsibility. And what I love about CM3, so when I first heard about it on the QT from Candace, I'm so glad it's publicly launched now. I kept my secret, but I couldn't wait to have conversations with Clinton, and we've already been engaged in these things, because one of the beautiful things about the CM3, and people, when they use the word credible messenger, we've got to be really clear about what we're talking about, because it spans a whole range of issues. But what we're talking about today and what CM3 does is critical to public safety and community involvement in that, because it talks about what is our role in helping create a space where everybody has an opportunity to thrive after they've made mistakes, keeping them from making mistakes, keeping us from creating an environment where people make choices that lead to their involvement in our criminal justice system, because we didn't create a space for them to thrive. And the work of CM3 is critical to creating that space. And so when we ask people the question, what does public safety mean? The consensus was, it means where we all want to live. It means
What's up, nephew?
Yeah, that was just the outline.
Somebody's
That we
not
passed
mute.
out to the audience.
It means, somebody's excited. It means creating a community where all of us and our families and our children want to live and have an opportunity to thrive. And I loved early on when I was the Assistant Attorney General, being in a meeting with folks from the Annie Casey Foundation, who said, when you start talking about the metrics and how you measure what success looks like for young people, stop metrics like how many don't get suspended, how many don't get expelled. Use the same metrics you use for your own children.
Mhm.
How many are on honor roll? How many are going to college? And that, to me, is the community health that CM3 is focused on. And so I'm excited about this work and excited about the opportunity to continue to partner with you. So everybody is my witness that I need CM3 integrally involved in the work of John Jay in helping our future law enforcement officers understand the power of CM3 and partnering with communities to create public safety. So I will leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I mean, it's really interesting as you talk about claiming or confronting the semantics, the words themselves, public safety, because it's such a charged terminology and means various things to various people. So really confronting that, it seems really a compelling body of work, and defining what is meant by that, and policing, of course, as the perhaps in some ways, perhaps arguably more visible pieces of the criminal justice apparatus, right, at the front end and its impact. But of course, we know there are ongoing parts of that continuum leading to mass incarceration, which obviously is a huge target that we are working to deconstruct. But community supervision is a big piece. The so-called community corrections, also known as largely probation, is a huge apparatus that is in the lives of so many young people, particularly young people of color, in a disproportionate, disparate way. So Steve, I wanted to turn to you as someone who has great experience both on the inside and now working to transform probation as we know it. And I wondered if you could talk about your work then at that point in the continuum, and how it connects to the larger conversation of a shift on reliance on traditional systems to a greater reliance on communities to play the role of working with our young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Clinton. I want to just kind of start where Carol was leaving off, which is when we think about what we want for our own children. And as a father, and I think about what I want for my own children, I want them to have opportunity. I want them to have connections. I want them to feel supported, have room to make mistakes. And when they make those mistakes, to have healthy learning moments and people who can support them. When I have twin boys, actually, first year of college, when they turned teenagers and got their first phone, one of the first things I did was make sure they had a couple different numbers in there, one of a real uncle and one of a play uncle, one of my good friends, because, and didn't make sense to them at the time, but I said, you know, at some point you're going to need to reach out. You're going to be in a bad spot. You're going to need some advice, and it's going to be something you're not going to want to come to dad with because I'm the authority figure. But it's important to have other people that you can reach out to. So I think of kind of this shift in probation in much the same way, and thinking about even my own personal experience, where I was a probation officer in the community I grew up in, asked to work in the school that I attended and supervising kids in that very same community. But having that badge and having that authority, it changed the landscape a little bit. And even though my intentions were good and I worked hard to be effective with young people and be compassionate, it still created a line. And so it's important to understand those roles and those lines, and where community has to kind of pick up the mantle with that. And so in terms of community supervision on the whole and probation, I say where we have to first start with is it has to be smaller. For probation to be bigger, it's going to have to be much smaller. We have far too many kids in our youth justice system on community supervision who simply shouldn't be. When we look at the national data, it shows us very clearly that there are actually more young people in this country who have probation officers and they're on like informal probation than kids who've actually been found guilty or adjudicated delinquent in court. So that just lets us know that it's a misuse of system resources and that we're criminalizing too much typical behavior. So community obviously plays a large role in moving kids out of that kind of formal system involvement. And divergent doesn't necessarily mean we do nothing. It doesn't always have to be a program, but a lot of times it's just making sure that those kids are being supported, that they're being connected to assets in their community that are going to give them, you know, the safe recreational spaces, the mentors, the supports that they need to thrive. And then on the other side of it, for the kids who would actually be in the formal system, I think there's a couple things with it. Probation obviously needs to shift from being focused on compliance and surveillance, following an adult model that's steeped in surveilling communities and people of color and kids of color. Needs to shift from that and being much more focused on youth development and really be the true alternative to incarceration that probation was originally designed to be. And that means also stepping up and being willing and able to work with the young people who have the most challenges and most needs, young people who've actually caused harm in their communities, and being able to work with them in those communities, which naturally means you need community to do that. To give kids the things that they really need. Systems aren't designed to do that. Systems honestly haven't traditionally been good at doing that, and this really shouldn't be their role. You need supports that are gonna long outlast the life of probation case for kids. And so it really is about leaning on those community partners, having, you know, like obviously credible messengers, so that, you know, you have people in their lives who have that credibility, know how to navigate those environments that they're in and be the types of supports that they need. So all around, whether you're moving kids out of the system or even with the kids that remain in the system, that connection with community is really important. And we've seen that, I think, especially over the last couple of years in the movements and the cause for social justice. We've seen that response, and where we've seen systems that are willing to embrace that, to roll up their sleeves, put on their running shoes, get out in the communities, not just talk about how there's not resources in the communities, but get out there and meet with people and discover those resources. I think that they found a treasure trove of willing, able people who can contribute mightily to the success we want to see with young people. So it really is about shifting that narrative. And last thing I'll just say, again, as a former probation officer, it's shifting from thinking that the probation officer and probation experience is the fix and the intervention. It should be much more about brokering those relationships and making sure that for that short period of time that they may be under the supervision of the court, they're getting connected to all the positive things that they need so that we can get out of their life as soon as possible. And so, again, it's just really shrinking the footprint of probation. It's just cast such a wide shadow, and we really need to reduce that.
Thank you, Steve. And, Candace, as Steve is talking, I'm thinking about you and your experience on the inside, running in the hot seat, running one of these systems on a state level, right? And obviously you have a awesome track record of closing facilities and, the downsizing that Steve talks about, right? And so I was wondering, from that experience, obviously understanding the challenges of dealing, even from the leadership position of trying to deal with a bureaucracy, right, and break through to a greater decrease of young people in the system in the first place, but a greater reliance on community. How do you see that actually playing out? And obviously in your position now, supporting work to deconstruct system, but build a community apparatus or wherewithal, right, to do the work that needs to be done. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to start by just naming a Black joy that I'm having at the fact that at this point on an afternoon, you can pull so many people and people of color together. I think it underscores the import for this work and the moment in history that we're in. Carol loves to open and give credit to everybody. But guys, if you don't know, Google her. This woman is incredible, and in her prior positions can help shape what public safety looks like for the country. And in this role, being at the helm of John Jay, which is a organization that frames that narrative for us all, has a real opportunity to shape what this work will look like going forward and add legitimacy to legitimate work that is not being acknowledged. And I will get to your question now, Clinton. In so many respects, both for systems change work and for the fields of justice reform, this is, it's like the frontier. The problem is it's almost sort of silly because it's like we've left to the end the beginning. Right now, in all this systems change work happening all over the country, you have people calling for something else. Right? The absence of that clear vision is the really firm assertion of what we want to see. And we're not as clearly stating that the step that we have always missed and are now sort of breaking on is the fact that we haven't invested in communities in a meaningful way. Now, this is not to disparage work that has happened, because in spite of that complete lack of real scaled investment, all of you folks on this call and across the country have done incredible, innovative things on fumes. But the truth is that for so many systems change efforts and for the scale work of criminal and youth justice reform, the thing that is missing is this meaningful scaled investment in a continuum of care in the community. We are framing all these fights for change in the negative. I want to see less of this, none of this. The truth is that we all vision in the affirmative. That's sort of the small truth about humans, fortunately or unfortunate. We need to know what we're running towards, not just what we're running away from. And so in my systems change work, so much was about articulating, we want less of this, but we got to bet bigger here. And that was a tough fight because I came from a state with the highest per capita pension deficit in the country. So resources were not aplenty, if to be really frank, but protecting and making that case became really important. And a lot of times what happens when you're trying to do that systems change is you're only ever going to get it by pulling it out of bricks and mortar. And the thing that's so funny about it, in a lot of these debates, we ended up having these torture conversations about evidence-based practice, practice-based evidence, which maybe we'll circle back to at this point in the conversation. But we bet in the billions on systems with piss poor outcomes every day. Right? Because we know all of these brick and mortar investments aren't yielding the returns in the affirmative that we want to see in public safety. And so I think, to your question in a really pointed way, until we bet really meaningfully and bigger here, both in the kind of interventions, the scale that they need, and the cost that it will take to evaluate them and get them as strong as we all want them to be able to be, we're not going to be able to press this work that we're all working towards as hard, because we force communities, the places we're sending you to, the place they're coming from, and adults, to do everything on a shoestring budget. And even when we say we love these interventions, the one with practice-based evidence, we always want to do it on the cheap, right? It's like, if the system is costing us $5, we want to spend 6 cents on the alternative. And that's not right. And so I think there's so much work to be done on making the case for that in the affirmative, and then really pushing for the quality of investment that we know this work will demand.
Wow, Candace, thank you. You know, I just had to write down vision in the affirmative, right? I think we can marinate on that for a while, right? And just hold that up, family, because that is exactly what we need to do. What is it that we want to create and build, right? Replace this with what? And thank you for that. And, you know, it really brings me to a question I want to raise with you, James. And, you know, so much of what Candace said and all that has been shared, you know, reminds me of some thinking that I've done over time and working with you all around this notion of what is the identity of systems? Like, what were they built for? Who do they think they are? What is their identity? And therefore their assumed core purpose, right? And been pushing this idea that instead of defining systems as the place with the answer and the cure and the medicine and the solution, that whatever apparatus, government apparatus it would be, there would be more of investors in, right, in the vision that Candace is talking about. And so it leads me to you, James, because I wanted to sort of expand the conversation a bit, as you have done, beyond justice itself to the wider frame of the fractured set of systems of care in our society, by which our young folks have been failed, and that's how they got to justice so often. Could you talk about that fractured system and connect that to then what we want to replace it with regards to via investment in community?
Yeah, so I want to add my greetings to this beloved community. On Friday, I joined Candace, as I often do. She just dropped some knowledge, boy. That was really beautifully put, as Candace always does. And so thank everybody on a Friday, late in the afternoon. I'm coming to you from San Francisco, and I want to acknowledge the ancestral lands of the Ohlone and the Ramaytush people and give respect and acknowledgement to their historical presence in the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area. So I come to you from there, and I want to jump right into this question, because we are at the beginning of a movement that I think Candace really framed. We have to keep two opposite thoughts in our head at the same time and not go crazy. And that is what is really difficult. And those thoughts are, one, the urgency of now, that so much harm is being done to our communities that we want to just jump in there and fix it. And the problem is, as Candace has suggested, but we have not had the time, the resources, and the ability to perfect what would be our vision of what we would do different. And the other burden that we have about perfecting a vision about what we would do differently is, in most other places that have the time to do that. So if you want to go from a gas-driven car to an electric vehicle, you're going to get the time and the space and some money to do that innovation. We don't get that because of fear. We are dealing with safety, and safety has nothing to do with logic. And when people get afraid, that space to innovate and to reimagine shrinks or disappears. If there's a shooting in a school, if there's a stabbing on the bus, all of a sudden the space that we're trying to create, as Carol's at the head of and is talking about, that space disappears. So we have to be working on, as Candace suggests, what is it that we will want different? if there's a home invasion robbery? Are we going to suggest that people hug it up on the corner right then? Or are we going to suggest that there are alternatives to calling the police that we trust and we believe in? And that's the movement we're at the beginning of. And I just think it is so exciting and it's so difficult, and we have to prepare for the backlash. So why do I say that? Because this is the premise. Every system, even the quote helping systems, the health department, the mental health department, damn near parks and recreation, housing, transportation, and clearly the four components of the justice ecosystem, police, probation, the courts, and the district attorneys. If we were to take those four components of the safety ecosystem, all of them are about racialized social control. Now, the health department won't tell you it's about racialized social control, but look at the outcomes for communities of color in COVID. Let's talk about transportation. What could be more benign than getting on the bus? Racialized social control. Which neighborhoods have the least public transportation? Which neighborhoods have the least ability to get where they need to be? So our position is, what I'm putting into our conversation, into this space, is that these systems were built to do exactly what they're doing, and that is to socially control us in a racialized hierarchy. And therefore, they can't be fixed. They can't. We have to reimagine them. We have to do what Candace suggests. I'm not going to say that's what she's saying, but the suggestion of what are we going towards? What is our vision of what we want as an alternative? And the reason that we know that these systems are built not for us is in how they operate. They spend 80 cents of every dollar on sustaining themselves and only 20 cents on working with us. Now, I don't know, I didn't do too good in math in school. And, despite going to school, in segregation, where the Black teachers wanted you to achieve, I still was bad in math. They kept trying, but I was still bad in math. But you cannot transform people on 20 cents on a dollar. You cannot. And so I don't know that we need to spend 80 cents on program and 20 cents on bureaucracy, but this I know, we need a new formula. Because of the dollars that Candace talked about, the dollars are there. We need to snatch them and take them. But when we snatch them and take them, we need to have the infrastructure in the community to meet the community's needs. And that's what we need to spend the next 80 years building. Because right now, there's a reason that there's 3,100 counties in the United States. It's not an accident that every one of them has a jail. Right? I mean, it's like, I don't care if you got more cows than people, you still got a jail. And that is because as a society, we have said that that's a necessary step. In terms of Candace's point of what we're running towards, what will we run towards that's not a jail that we feel keeps us safe? We have to create that infrastructure. We have to create incredible messengers and people in the community. They know the elements of what is necessary to keep us safe, to have young people act as best we can have them act, have adults act as best we can have them act. And when they harm people, we know what to do with them in this way. So I actually think that, that we need to be trying to do the harm reduction in improving these systems, but never thinking these systems are going to deliver liberation for us, because they're not. They were created to control us. That's not in their brief. It's not in their mission. And so while we're doing the reduction of harm, we have to be on steroids working on what is an alternative. What is a vision that we would have? When somebody harms somebody, who do we want to have to respond? I don't want law enforcement. Okay, we could have law enforcement respond that's been to some kind of cultural training, that can, walk up and they've had cultural training, they can say "Que pasa?" I mean, but that isn't structural. Maybe we should have other people respond. Maybe we should have Baba Salim respond with some other people and some people with other skills, other talents that can deal with this incident and begin to build a structure. That is a structure that is built on well-being and healing and restoration rather than custody, suppression, and control. And so I finish by saying we are at the beginning of this new vision of how we're best kept safe. And it is inevitable because the demographic numbers in this country, since more and more people of color are coming, why would we continue to accept a system that has socially controlled us without sitting around playing cards, talking with each other, playing some dominoes and go, can't we do better than this? Can't we do better than this? What would we do that's different and keeps us safe? So I'll leave it there.
James, among the many profound things that you said, a couple of points jump out. One is, as you were ending the question, and as Candace raised, and as we talked about, what are we building? What are we going towards? What are we imagining? And how do we implement that? What does that look like? And you talk about credible messenger, a widely used term. Some people think of it as folks who do violence interruption, mediation, peacemaking, outreach work. Of course, the CM3 model is inclusive of that, but really focused on that deep wraparound life coaching, transformative mentoring, co-navigation, life planning, support with youth and families. But there's a wide array of work to be done that community needs to do. And we obviously want to keep talking about that, and we're going to go to Q&A soon and continue the conversation. But I did want to follow up one point that you seem to allude to, something you've talked about before, in terms of the demographics in this society. You had mentioned getting the resources, freeing the resources. That's part of it. The other part was to do what with, but
right. Once you got the money, what you gonna do with it? Right.
Right. But getting the money, getting the resources, is it fair to say you're suggesting that's going to come because of demographics, or there's potential for that? How do you see that part of the issue being addressed, getting the resources?
Yeah, see, that's the holding two thoughts that are opposite in your head at the same time. Because it's like, I mean, where I come from, I'm in my 60s. So I come from the, generation of whoever is the first Black person, don't say nothing bad about them, no matter what they do, because they're the first. You know what I mean? So then, the next generation is like, all skin folk ain't kin folk now, so then there's the next generation coming a little harder, right? And so now it is this sense of, it ain't just because you look like me, you're gonna do right. So but what I do know is that as more and more people of color come to the country, the narrative doesn't sell as easily as it used to sell when there were less of us here. And so my position is, in the short term, we have to make these demands for freeing up these funds and have a strategy that we keep pushing, that meetings like this continue to do. We're not the only ones in the country talking about this now. Other people are talking about it. What's a new vision? And so what I believe is California, New Mexico, Hawaii, Maryland, Texas, and one other state, and Nevada. Those are the 6 states that are majority people of color now. In the next 5 years, 5 more states are gonna flip. Georgia, New Jersey. And so what I'm saying is, as you become a majority people of color, in California, we've been a majority people of color for 20 years now. What happens is, it's not just at the elected level, but the people appointed to the commissions to select the judges, the people who run the statewide corrections boards, the people who then they become more people of color. And now we can slam down that ace and say, actually, we're not giving that money to that old reform because it doesn't work. We are going to invest in these people, and we have to build the capacity in the community so that when we're ready to invest in folk, they are ready to take the money. And so it does take a while. and it takes a movement to do it. At the same time, we have this sense of urgency. But what I say to people that get in the movement, my brothers and sisters, is we can't go from action, we can't go from hurt to action immediately without planning, relationship building, and value setting.
Mm.
And a lot of people want to go from hurt to action. And I think it's our job to slow them down a bit, to say, yo, what's the action we're thinking about? It might make you feel good, but it may not sustain.
Mm-hmm. 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 Candace,
so that's my best answer to your question, Clinton. It's going to take a while. People of color by themselves won't do it, but it definitely is the formula to make it happen.
Clinton, can I just add one thing while we're talking about the urgency of now is, and what I don't want people to miss is the opportunity we have now because of the federal dollars post-COVID being released out there. And we have got to make sure that while we're being urgent and trying to do as both Candace and James said, plan, we got to make sure we carve out some of that money for this, for that planning, for that innovation, for that new visioning. And so we have got to, you know, at the local level, that's where the money is. We've got to really show up, speak up, and make sure that we get an allocation of that funding. If we, and because I think that now with the additional money coming in and with whatever happens with the infrastructure bill and the budget, these things are in there. We need to be at the table getting some of that money while people aren't thinking of it as a zero-sum game, because it will get tougher again. But right now we've got to jump in there. And you've already done a lot of the planning. You know, I love James's methodology of thinking about how we move through this, but a lot of that has started. And so capture those dollars before they disappear into things that are just new toys that really don't make systemic and foundational change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. New toys. We see a lot. Candace, you were going to say.
There's so much here, and I'm going to try to be brief because I know there's not a lot of time. The one thing I want to just say to James's point is I want to make the case for the whole dollar. And, you know, we talk about cents on the dollar. I actually want to make the case for the whole dollar. And the reason why I think goes back to what Carol opened with, which is that we all know what safety looks like. And the interesting thing about safety is that you have never, anybody on this call, you cannot make me believe, felt safe that had anything to do with a public safety system. Paramilitaristic occupation does not make one feel safe, right? If you want to feel safe, you take your tail to the nice neighborhood, right? Whatever that is in your city, you know what safe feels like. It feels like road, it feels like small businesses, fancy restaurants, good schools, lighting, gardens. It feels like investment in a community. Communities of color are the only communities in this country that we gaslight and act like we don't understand what it takes to achieve safety, right? Someone said, you know, you're climbing in the window when ain't nobody climbing in the window in upper Northwest Washington, DC, because they got street lights and they know when you call the police, the people come back. You know what I mean? We know what investment looks like and we gaslight communities of color. We need the whole dollar. Part of what we want is to invest in credible messengers in the same way we invest in any other sort of peacekeeping force. Now, I will have a whole nother talk about whether or not law enforcement is actually a peacekeeping force, but I'm just going to use that term because that is what it's supposed to be. You know, we invest in them at a competitive salary, at a retirement that is bankrupting many local jurisdictions, at housing incentives to keep them in the neighborhoods that they want to be in, at furthering education program. Like, we invest. Right? What intervention program, violence intervention program, do you know where you can barely make a living wage salary, let alone that kind of really top shelf investment? Like, that is what we need. We want the whole dollar on top of the other community investments and support that make us less fundamentally reliant on just the public safety system to thrive. So that was the one point I wanted to make based on what James said. Yeah. But based on what Carol said and what somebody put in the chat, they don't know where the ARP dollars are going. This is another favorite topic of mine, having come out of the Office of Management and Budget in the state of Illinois. So often when we're dealing with politicians and policymakers, we are so concerned about their headlines, what they're saying in the media, what they're releasing about what they care about. And the only, especially communities of color, need to be paying attention to is the bottom line. What is happening in those budget and appropriations conversations that we are so often left out of? In most places, not every place, but the fall right now in your state and local jurisdictions, and I know this is happening in some states we are working in, people are all shoved into windowless conference rooms and they are carving up that art pie. And our communities need to be fighting, getting in those rooms and holding, and I'm not talking about showing up one time to ask for a little piece of that pie. I'm talking about relentless, really advocacy on getting the whole dollar out in this moment in history, to Carol's point, because this window will close, as well as thinking about what it means that somebody who has been a friend of this work is now at the agency that administers some of the largest public service grants in the country, like Teach for America and Youth Bill. We spend billions of dollars every year to send affluent white kids into communities of colors to save us. What if we took that same amount of money and flooded it into communities of colors to fund the people who are already there and doing it? So we just have to really think about these places where these buckets of funding are sitting and get after them immediately, to Carol's point.
Yes, Candace, wow, thank you for raising those critical points, around investment and how it actually plays out. We're gonna go to the audience. We have a couple of minutes left for questions, but these points that you're making, James, Carol, Steve, all of us, are points of discussion, obviously, that we're going to continue to pursue beyond this panel today, and through CM3 convenings and the other convenings that everyone here and those in the audience are part of. These are the critical questions. There are some answers. There is some knowledge, wisdom, understanding, experience that can get to some of these answers. And I just want to lift that up. Because a panel helps to raise things and brilliant insights. But of course, we're going to continue this conversation. Dana, I think you've been looking at the chat, and I know there's some questions emerging. We have a few minutes left. Do you have anything you would like to lift up?
Actually, this will be a great time to open up the floor and let all of our guests know. Please focus your attention to the chat. If you can, we like to hear questions directly from you. In reference to anything you'd like to ask Clint or any of our panelists. So we like to take a quick second to let everyone insert your questions into the chat so that I can hand those to Clint to ask for our panelists. And thus far, Clint, a lot of comments, but no direct questions just yet.
Well, you know what? Let me just take a moment in our last couple of moments, and I know that questions will emerge. We are keeping the chat. We're going to follow up on everything that comes out here. So this is not our only opportunity. But I did just want to give our panelists, in these last few moments, a final comment for now that speaks to this conversation from whichever perspective you'd like to approach it. I know there's so much to say, but why don't we begin with Steve?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's obviously honored to be on such a great panel, and as Carol said, just learning so much. And so just to reinforce even what Candace was saying about this with the dollar, and I mean, I think that's what we're really talking about, which is, yes, it's moving towards that vision, but exercising mechanisms that we have now. So really influencing, working with systems, because I think, we do see more and more folks who are understanding that you're not getting the outcomes that you're looking for. We have systems that are not working with youth in the way that they should. And so really just making those different types of investments. And again, moving some of those dollars away. We've seen that where probation caseloads are shrinking. We see where there's vacancies. And so there's a lot of opportunities to shift a lot of those dollars directly into the community programs and to shift them in places that we've worked with Casey Foundation, shifting the dollars, not just into programs for slots for kids on probation, but just investing in those community programs because they're good for everyone in the community, whether the kid's on probation, whether it's his sibling, whether it's his family, and all of that. So I think we really do have an opportunity as we really have a much better understanding about what we already know. about youth development and what young people need to thrive, and really putting our money behind that in that way. And it doesn't come with supervision. It doesn't come with a whole bunch of compliance and rule following. It comes with making sure young people have those connections. So echoing, really love what Candace said about, we have to resource up these community-based organizations and the people working in those organizations, and really professionalize it and thinking about what are the paths for accreditation and really professionalizing a whole new workforce that I think is there and ready and willing, and that we need to lean on.
Thank you, Steve. Carol, any closing thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that in addition to everything they talked about creating the vision of where we want to go, we need to control the narrative as we walk this path and not let other people define what success looks like. And somebody said earlier about worrying about the backlash. Some things are going to go wrong. It's not all going to go right, but that doesn't mean you stop. We see that in lots of things where things go wrong, but the system keeps operating. We have got to really work hard, push hard, control the narrative, and get this word out about our role, our communities needing to be able to be in control of what safety looks like in our community, what thriving looks like in our community, and how we succeed. So that's my one parting thought.
Thank you, Carol. James?
My thought is as we begin this conversation of reimagining, that really is the place that I want to be in, to reimagine this safety. And I love Candace's piece about the whole dollar. And one of the things that we have encountered in our work is, because government isn't the corporate sector, a lot of government agencies hire people of color. So in San Francisco, there's a lot of Filipinos, a lot of Chinese folk, a lot of Black folk, Latinos that have government jobs. And as we deal with this safety system, it's a lot of middle-class people of color that we are challenging the institutions they work in. And they are in unions, and they are middle class. They have sent their kids to college on these incomes in these government jobs. It's a lot of people of color working in the justice ecosystem. And part of our imagining has to be, we can't just say to them, I'm sorry, we're closing the jail, you go learn how to drive a bus. That ain't gonna work. We have to be loving and supportive of those people that have gotten these jobs, that have raised us on these jobs. I have uncles and cousins and people who worked at the Department of Corrections for a minute, or who are social workers for the county. I mean, all of us have people that work for the county in our families. And so I think while we're reimagining, we really need to rethink how we do this job transformation along with the systems transformation we're doing. Because I can tell you, them people are gonna fight back hard. They're gonna fight back hard against us. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. So we have to be thoughtful and loving, and not come from a place of opposition in terms of how we retransform these positions.
On that note, James, on the note of love and being loving and how we approach this work, we're going to end and say thank you to our illustrious panel, Candace, Carol, Steve, James. We're so grateful. We're blessed. We're enlightened with your comments, and the conversation will continue. Thank you so much.
Guys, be sure to go show some love in the chat for such a rich, robust panel with full of information. And while you guys were doing your closing remarks, some questions did come through. And because of a lack of time for everyone who submitted a question, we'll be sure to get back to those questions. From James Hartman, Mr. Bell, he wanted you to explain that 28 rule. Santa Hafiz wanted to ask, how do we transition RJ into the work? And Mimi wanted to ask something as simple as, how do you start with little or no money? So guys, we have your questions. We'll be sure to provide responses to you right after our wrap up of our CM3 Day 2. And unfortunately, we've run out of time. And I feel like those wonderful remarks that came from our guests kind of helped answer some of the questions that we might have. So again, thank you, Clint, for that robust panel of subject matter experts. And it really shows that this is not casual work. This is scientific work. And with true doctors, true scientists attached. This work may have gone underfunded or misfunded for some time, but we now all see that there's some true specialists involved, and we have to treat this work scientifically and more formally so that it can get the investment that it needs. So with that time, we're going to transition now to give me an opportunity to introduce Clint's partner in the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement known as CM3, a very dynamic brother, long-standing public servant, and the former senior executive at the United States Department of Labor. Please show some love in the chat and join me in welcoming Mr. Lorenzo Rennie Harris. Sorry, Harrison, pardon me for shortening that last name. Thank you, Rennie, for joining.
I think it's safe to say good afternoon. It's still just after 5 p.m. here on the East Coast. Thank you, Dana. Appreciate you. It's difficult for me to overstate the joy it brings to me for what I'm about to do, which is to introduce to you the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement, America's 23rd Secretary of Labor, the first African-American ever to lead the United States Department of Labor, one of the most profound leaders the department has ever had, Alexis M. Herman. She oversaw the department, which during her tenure provided more than $11 billion a year in services and support to American workers and job seekers. Ms. Herman was born in Mobile, Alabama. She began her career working and helping out-of-school men and women in Pascagoula, Mississippi, in the Pascagoula, Mississippi shipyard. And to demonstrate how deep the Alabama ties go, we heard Clint share how his mother and father were a young couple in Montgomery during the times of the Montgomery bus boycott. Well, as it turns out, being just a hop, skip, and jump away in Mobile, Secretary Herman, her mother and family, used to know Clinton's father and mother. And in fact, Alexis shared with me that she used to refer to Clint's dad as Lacey. She never knew his name was Archie. So I won't go any deeper into the Lacey, Smiley, or Herman family archives here, less to say that they are incredible, y'all. But I truly believe it does speak to all of our credible messenger ties by sharing such connections and history with you. Ms. Herman would go on from her Alabama roots to lead major efforts throughout her life, helping women of color, particularly as it relates to joining the professional ranks in the corporate sector, in major corporations. President Jimmy Carter appointed her the youngest director of the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor at the age of 29. And President Bill Clinton made her, as I mentioned, the 23rd Secretary of Labor in 1997. She led international policy efforts related to child labor standards, championed the implementation of new workforce development legislation, oversaw the safest workplace record, and implemented the most aggressive unemployed youth initiative, I should say, since the 70s, amongst other things. Her father, as the first African-American elected to any office in the Deep South in the 1940s, helped instill in her a deep belief in the political process. So as we were listening to Brother Bell, that really rings true as a way to create meaningful change. Since leaving government, she's gone on to lead numerous diversity initiatives in the corporate arena, sits on the boards of directors of numerous Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits, including the National Urban League and the Dorothy I. Height Educational Foundation, has received more than 25 honorary doctorates from major colleges and universities. She's an alum of Xavier University in Louisiana. This virtual format doesn't lend for the conventional presentation of her bio. However, we're dropping it in the chat. So as Clint said regarding the esteemed panel that I was just incredibly informed by, We hope that you find time to review it. So without more to do, at least in this format, please join me in welcoming our Secretary of Labor, Alexis M. Herman.
Well, good
Hi,
afternoon,
Alexis.
good evening. I hope you can hear me okay. And
Yes,
thank
ma'am,
you.
we could hear you, Madam Secretary. We could hear you. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us, Madam Secretary. We are so
Well-
blessed and happy for you to participate in the launch of the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement.
Well, let me just say, first of all, Lorenzo, I am delighted to be a part of this really very significant conversation. I was listening all ears to the previous panel, and I salute them for their vision, for their words. They were just so on point, you know, and it's almost like what's past this prologue. I was thinking to
That
myself,
damage to it probably just like made shit worse. Yeah, but he ain't gonna put.
Our apologies for the technical difficulties, everyone. Madam Secretary, you have the floor again.
okay, dear, thank you. But I was just saying, you know, we keep going full circle. And as you were talking about Clinton, Lacey, and his parents and our connection, you know, it amazes me that the longer Black folk keep talking, okay, we're going to find some connection somewhere. And so
Yeah,
I've been so pleased, of course, to be associated with you throughout the years, but I'm just so delighted that you and Clinton are engaged in this vital, critical, and ongoing, it doesn't end, necessary work, putting that focus on the investment that we have to have for our young people, you know? And so I congratulate you. I thank you for the invitation. I think the
Yeah.
Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement, you know, you call it CM3, it's so powerful in terms of what's needed here. You know, the panel talked about the urgent call of now. And I think every decade, every season feels so urgent. But I think it's fair to say, given where we are today, that perhaps, Lorenzo, there's been no time like this present moment to re-engage our country really in this vital conversation. So I'm looking forward to
yes,
taking it where
yes,
you
ma'am.
want to go.
Yes, ma'am. Well, our session is entitled Beyond Reform of the Justice System, What Will It Take for Marginalized Youth to Survive and Thrive? I do have a question, Madam Secretary, to get us started. Given all your experience and accomplishments, ma'am, way too many for us to remind the audience of here. I can't help but think of my own experience with you, getting recruited by you from my beloved Strive to join you. I was working in the basement of James Weldon Johnson housing projects, for those who don't know, in East Harlem. And Madam Secretary here plucked me to come head up a $250 million per annum youth initiative, where we set up comprehensive youth centers in 36 so-called high poverty communities around the country. So when we hear the members of the previous panel speak so deeply about the assets being in the community, I don't know what else represents that than such an act that she put forth that changed my life. We were in Boston, we were in Los Angeles, Boyle Heights to be exact, San Diego, Tucson, Houston, San Antonio, Tampa, DC, of course, Birmingham, Albany, Georgia, Detroit, Buffalo. I got to go on a long way to get to 36. There were Native American sites as well at Navajo, Ogallala Sioux, at Pine Ridge. And I was almost like separately incorporated with Madam Secretary's endorsement, y'all. I met folks on the ground in each of these communities, visited all of them except for about 6. was, again, a $250 million initiative focused on disconnected youth, including justice-involved youth, 14 to 21 years of age, in which we made great strides. Senator Kennedy was incredibly important, but politics intervened and our work was interrupted. So again, Madam Secretary, given all this experience you have with social causes, I'm just trying to remind you of just one, of empowering people in the South, throughout the country, internationally. Can you kindly just let us know what's in your heart about what you think is or needs to be the focal point for us at the Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement as we launch yet another endeavor, as my brother Clint said yesterday, that stands on the shoulders of so many who came before us.
Well, listening to you take me down memory lane there, Lorenzo. There's actually a story in you joining me at the Labor Department that I think speaks to the future of what CM3 is trying to do. It's one thing in Washington to have all the great legislative initiatives, all of the great policies that we formulate, and we think that we are, quote, making a difference through those efforts. And most people don't realize it's only in the writing of the regulations of those laws that get passed, that the practical translation of how is all of this really supposed to work, that you begin to have practical results and practical insights into what needs to be done. And so you're right, while we had this great legislative initiative, we did put the resources into it. I was impressed with Candace on the last panel talking about the whole dollar. Well, we talked about the whole dollar for the whole person. You couldn't just look at the criminal justice system. You had to look at the education system. You had to look at housing. You had to look at all of the needs. And that's what CM3 is doing. And we brought those resources, but I needed someone who understood this, who got it in a practical sense, who came from the community. We weren't dealing in pie in the sky rhetoric, but we had to be very practical in terms of how do we translate all of these policy initiatives into practical outcomes that would make a difference in the lives of our young people. And that's what you were doing in a real sense at Stride. You were on the ground every day, so you got it. And I think so much today when you talk about, the go forward now, we're missing, I think, that practical hands-on engagement of people who aren't just spouting statistics or who can tell you about the incarceration rates and all of the problems, but who have the insight and the vision of what we need to do about it. And that's one of the great strengths, I think, of CM3. It's that practical focus now that you're bringing to bear.
Yes.
And so I don't want to lose that in terms of what does it take. It still takes the Lorenzos of the world, the Clinton Lacey's of the world, who have the backgrounds that are connected to the real issues. You're not coming at this from an academic perspective. You're not coming at it from a theoretical research perspective. And I think the other thing that I would say in terms of focus, I heard the previous panelists talk about the need to control the narrative. I think it is so important in this environment today, with the impact of social media, with all of the negative stories that permeate the news cycle every single day. It is so hard to break through and to have the critical focus that's needed to remind our people, our country, our stakeholders that, sure, this is the right thing to do, but it really is about our collective future. I mean, these young folk represent our continued prosperity, our future as a country. And so I think we have so many messages out there now and so many negative messages out there that I would encourage CM3 as you relaunch this vision. Keep it simple. let's get very clear about the 2 or 3 or 4 things we want to hone in on from a message standpoint of view, from an education standpoint of view. I digress for a minute here, but I remember so well when we were debating the very first healthcare bill, nothing like what we had under President Obama. But this was really the first bill where we were trying to expand medical services for women because they were coming into the workforce in greater numbers. I was director of the Women's Bureau then under President Carter. So I'm talking about the late 70s, the early 80s. And we wanted to have mammograms covered, okay, as a part of healthcare insurance, and they weren't at that time. And I'll never forget this congressman from South Carolina who was on the floor and railing about why he couldn't do this, why we shouldn't do this as a country. And he said, do you realize if you add mammograms to healthcare insurance, that all the women in America are going to step forward and start demanding mammograms. And I was sitting there with the late, great Dorothy Height. I'll never forget it. And Dorothy looked at me and she said, well, Alexis, here's some man who's clearly never had a mammogram before. Because if he had, he wouldn't be saying everybody's gonna want to rush in and have one. But it led into a much more significant conversation between the two of us. And that conversation was simply this, you know, just because you get it doesn't mean everybody else gets it. And so we have to be aware of the need to constantly enroll, to constantly educate about what the critical issues are and why is it important. Mm-hmm. And don't assume because you've said it before, mm-hmm. That it connected, that people heard it. And so I'm really big on, let's get clear around the 2 or 3 things that are the why we have to do it, keep it simple, and repetition, repetition, repetition. Mm-hmm. In all of the various lanes of communication that we have to engage in today.
Yes. Wow, that's pretty power-packed. We'll be chopping that up for a couple of weeks, Madam Secretary. Thank you. You know, I hope I don't throw you off with this question. I remember you introducing me to Ernie Green. That's Ernest Green of the Little Rock 10. And you know,
Little Rock 9. The
Little Rock 9, I meant to say. Mm-hmm. And so I think about the courage that was demonstrated during those days and during the days of Mrs. Lacey and others. And we witnessed such a uprising on last year, you know, during 2020. And I'm wondering how it is that we might best marshal the strength and power of our young people. I mean, we were all incredibly impacted by the visual that we got from their potential. And so I wonder if there's connections that analogies you might be able to draw from that experience on last year to those that have been exhibited across history by so many of our elders and ancestors. And so how we could marshal it into changing public policy, as you say. How can we best harness it to get at some of the issues that we're trying to grapple with at Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's interesting you raised that, and I know you're talking about in the wake of George Floyd, what we saw, the visuals, the horror of it all, you know, and yet we saw so many of our young people step into the forefront. You know, as I listened to the previous panel, one of the things that I hope CM3 will think about because of last year, I am amazed at the number of leaders in corporate America who were shocked, who couldn't believe it, who simply had no idea, you know. We knew it. We still know it. And there's been something that's, it's a term of art now in many companies. It's called courageous conversations. And there they are engaging many of their leaders, people of color, and their workforces generally, to talk about what does it mean to you? How did you experience it? Speak up and tell us what more should we be doing? Company X, Company Y, Company Z. I could rattle off 50 companies right now that I know were engaged in, quote, this kind of dialogue. And it ran the gamut, you know, to hear Black parents talk about the fear that they had of their own child just going outside, you know, particularly if they had a Black male child, and how risky it was. And Black women talking about what it meant to be a Black mother in particular. And the shock, really, the shock on the faces of so many of the white colleagues and counterparts. And so when I think about then and now, when you ask me the contrast, I think what struck me was a sense that it took this visual, those 9+ minutes, to get this dialogue restarted, relaunched in a different kind of way. And I'm often asked, you know, do you think it's real? Do you think this time the change that people are talking about, that they want to engage in, is it sustainable? And I say, in all honesty, I am guardedly optimistic. Guardedly optimistic, because there was something that was ignited. But more importantly, there were resources for the first time that were released into very specific areas, into very specific communities. Because all of a sudden, the business community recognized that they have to live and work in these communities that they saw on the screen, where the riots were taking place, where the businesses were being destroyed, and that they had to have some ownership in change. And for me, you know, out of all of these years where I spent a lot of time on the government side, policy side, government funding, nonprofit engagement, to hear for the first time corporate America being serious about this, I think there's an opportunity for CM3. I really do. And I think it has to be targeted. I think you can't just do a big brush nationally, but I think there are key communities. I heard my brother from California, who I haven't seen in a long time, James, talk about even communities of color, where he was doing the demographic layout of where we are the majority and expect to become the majority. But I think we've got to become very strategic in linking up resources, not just with the government, but partnering more effectively with corporate America to invest in long-term sustainable commitments and not something that's simply tied to an annual budget cycle. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. We learned when we launched the Yo movement. I mean, our vision there, of course, was a 5-year budget commitment, the first time in the federal government, so that we could have sustained change for interventions. You can't do anything on an annual budget in a year's time. You know that. You can get started,
Right.
but it takes time to invest in the whole person, and that's what CM. So I actually think you do have a moment in time right now with your focus to go into critical communities, very much like we did, on a pilot basis, and marry up public resources, government resources, along with corporate resources, and get a multi-year commitment. You know, don't ask for less than 3 years. You know, we went for 5.
Yes.
Now, that you can take advantage of.
Getting stalled just a little bit, Madam Secretary. There you go. We're getting stalled a bit, Madam Secretary.
The world of Zoom. We're all in this world of Zoom.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Clint reminds me of it all the time.
Yeah, it happens.
Don't get stressed, right? We're relegated to this technology. But this has been incredible. This has been incredible, Secretary Herman. I'm just so, I feel so blessed and privileged. You know, Glenda, my wife, was wanting to express her regard and just say hello. She had to run out. You know, you know, we have your picture up in the Harrison household. And I want to ask you, ma'am, so employment has been such a central focus of your public service all the way from the beginning. And I know you worked in New York too. Not many people probably know that. I think Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken. And so, you have access to these high discussions in corporate sector, many of the Fortune 500 companies. I mean, any pearls of wisdom, Madam Secretary, you know, being the former Secretary of Labor and being a job skills provider as well, early in your career, that you might you know, articulate to us or share with us as it relates to trying to help youngsters create life paths for youngsters. You know, one of the first things we're trying to do, talking about the whole person, is deal with the emotional, you know, the emotional challenges and hurdles that so many of our young people need to make before they even get to being able to realize their skills, talents, and potential you know, in training or in academics or what have you. So I wonder, Madam Secretary, is there something in particular around job training that you might share with us as it relates to the population we're trying to?
Yeah, I do. You know, at the end of the day, for me, you're right. I've spent my entire life, all of my careers, no matter where I've been. I started in the shipyards in Pascagoula, Mississippi, helping young out of school, primarily Black male youth, break into the apprenticeship movement for the very first time, into the skilled trades movement.
Yes.
The reality for me, I think you have to come from a clear principle of why it's important. For me, I've always leaned into the economic argument. I think it's so important to understand that these are the workers of the future. And when you look at the skill sets, the educational pattern, the dropout rates, how much our children are at risk now of not being able to have those whole life experiences that deprives employers, deprives our country, it deprives us of what we're going to need to keep growing. These are not some tangential issues on the side. This is core to our future, to our growth. And the reason I'm so proud of the work you're doing at CM3 is that you're bringing that whole focus together. You're talking about the emotional issues. You can't stay in school. You can't be invested in getting an education when you're struggling with emotional issues, when the family's not there, when the parents aren't present in the home. When you talk about what's necessary, for instance, just to keep them motivated, to give them that mentoring and to give them that support, so that they want to do better, so that they can have a belief that somehow, the future is possible for me too. So many of our kids today, they've lost hope. You know that. They
Yes.
don't dream, And so what I appreciate about your work is that you recognize that it's not just about, getting an education. It's not just about getting a job. It is about where you live. It is about safe communities. It is about how you do get protected inside the criminal justice system. How do you deal with recidivism? How do you make sure that that first offense is not a life sentence against your life? How do you bring all of the stakeholders to the table on this dialogue? That's when I started off when I said the education of this is so important in terms of the awareness of we've got to be up here, And so for me, I think you have to keep the economic principle, jobs and employment core to a conversation in terms of meaningful work for the future for the entire country. But it's got to be about how do you embrace the whole person to get them on that path, to get them on that path.
Yes.
And so I think you can't lose that, but you got to keep bringing it back. You got to keep talking about those dropout rates. You got to keep talking about those high unemployment rates. You've got to keep talking about the suicide rates now. You've got to keep talking about why we've got to have this holistic approach. If we're going to not just save our children, but we got to save ourselves along with saving them, because that's what we're all in this together. And I don't think there's enough appreciation for that today, where we are so divided as a country on so many fronts. But I've always believed that young people in particular, it's a rallying cry. And I think you organize around this issue, quite frankly, in ways that it's much more difficult to organize around others.
Well, I tell you, Alexis, I'm feeling like it's almost a couple decades ago.
It was, Lorenzo. You're feeling that way because it was a couple decades ago.
So, time is, I'm sorry to say, it seems as though a time limitation is coming upon us, but there was one question or one curiosity expressed in the chat around civic education. So you got to promise me I'll be able to follow up with you, and I promise to Mr. Malik, to Abdul, that I'll pass along to Abdul some of that wisdom and strategy that you can surely share with us around civic education. But I can't thank you enough, Madam Secretary. I wonder if there's one last thing you might want to express, ma'am. You're looking absolutely fantastic, Secretary. So I just, I just hope that's not inappropriate.
It's never inappropriate.
I guess you're still active. You're still so
never inappropriate. Never inappropriate.
I guess I got to look forward to working hard here for a great many more years, man, because I see you're still at it. So is there any one last thing you might want to share with us before?
I would just say to all of you in the CM3 movement, really, and I say this to you and Clinton personally as well, don't give up. It's hard sometimes, I think, when you've been at this for so long and you see the problems still persist, not to become discouraged. But we have to have the ability to keep pushing through and to surround yourself in this movement with people who believe in what you're doing, because it is so critical. It is so important. And don't be distracted by the naysayers, who say, been there, done that. Yeah, but this is what it's all about. It's always about how we relaunch, reinvigorate, how we continue to press forward. You know, was it Du Bois? Or, you know, I heard it first from Bayard Rustin. You know, freedom is a constant struggle. And
Yes,
it
indeed.
really is.
Yes,
It
indeed.
really is.
We'll
And
keep at
so
it.
we just have to keep at it, keep doing the work. And my great mentor, Dorothy Height, and I leave you with her words that always encourage me. She said, when they tell you that the times aren't ripe, then it is up to us to keep ripening the times for ourselves and for our children. And that's what you're doing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you so much, Secretary Herman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you for
bless
sharing.
you. God
You know,
bless you. God
you
bless
couldn't
you.
hesitate 1 second when I reached out to you. You don't know how encouraging that is to us. So we're giving you the virtual clap.
Okay, well, hugs back to you.
Hearts out to you.
Yeah, hugs
Hearts
to
out
you.
to you. Let's stay in touch, okay? If there's
Please, okay. Give my
anything we
love to
can do.
Glenda.
I
Give
will.
my love to Glenda. All right. Blessings. Blessings.
God bless you. Thank you,
God
man.
bless you.
Thank you again, Madam Secretary, for such an informative and just electric and inspiring feedback. We do appreciate that. At this time, I want to check in really quick to see if Mr. David Brotherton is with us today. Just wanted to check in. All righty, and if not, we'll be sure to reach out to Mr. Brotherton, get some great feedback from him on his remarks and brief highlights of the evaluation of Credible Messenger. So with that said, Clint, I'll be handing it back over to you and Brother Rennie Harrison to talk about moving the work forward for CM3. What's next for us and what's the vision?
Yeah, thank you, Dana, so much. And let me just again echo on behalf of everyone here today and all those represented, thanking Secretary Herman for that, blessing us with insight and her presence, her grace, and her wisdom, knowledge, and inspiration really to continue forward. So we take those words and we will continue to ripen the times as we move forward. And thank everybody hanging in there on this Friday afternoon, but it's been so inspiring. It's almost timeless. And we are grateful for all of the contributions to today. CM3 is an organization, you know, you mentioned Dana, Professor Dave Brotherton, he's at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and Dr. Bahia Muhammad, who we heard from yesterday, was also on a team with him doing an evaluation of the Credible Messenger work that we expanded in DC and really highlighted some of the strengths and the potential, all of which we've been talking about over the last 2 days in terms of why it's so important to invest in communities. Investing in Credible Messengers is investing in communities. It's building the capacity, knowledge, access, and resources for communities to take its rightful place. And as was discussed in the panel, replacing the present paradigm that we are working hard to transform. CM3 as an organization, you know, our core mission is to support and advance credible messenger work around the country, indeed around the world. We fundamentally are working in I would say, 3 core ways, 3 general ways that we approach it. If you could sort of imagine the old Venn diagrams, like the circles that come together that touch one another. One of those circles is as practitioners, as partners on the ground, working with folks in communities to help build organizations and build the infrastructure to implement what we're offering to the community as a CM3 model. We talked about a lot of different types of work that credible messengers may do. The CM3 model really focuses, as we've been talking about, is this very deep, trusting relationship building, this long-term walking with youth and families, helping them articulate their dreams, reclaiming their dreams, and putting together plans with them, led by them, that take them to their destination, short-term, intermediate, long-term, co-navigating with them through their process, be it through the justice system, but also connecting to and accessing other services and resources and opportunities. The model that we're offering has training, it has curriculum, It has processes for organizations to connect to justice systems, to access youth who are in that justice system, and to gain space in those systems to bring that knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and experience to the process, so that we can change the process, so that we can transform the process. So credible messengers transform lives, but also transform systems. And so in one of our core circle, our tier one, we may call work, we're working hands-on daily, partnering with organizations to engage systems. And so we're on the ground in places like Jackson, Mississippi, Los Angeles County, Harris County, Houston, Texas, to name places where we are like there on the ground, virtually and soon literally in person, to walk hand in hand to implement the CM3 model. We're also, another one of those circles is reaching a wider array of jurisdictions around the country and seeks to just to provide whatever type of assistance places may need. You know, there are many cities, counties, states who are implementing versions of credible messenger work, and we're in conversation. Is it training that we could help provide? Is it facilitating relationships between government and community that is authentic, right? That is respectful, that actually is working towards transformation. Various things that CM3 could offer to help both community organizations, credible messengers, government officials, funders, researchers, to help advance the work. And that's a wide circle, and we're talking to jurisdictions around the country to do that work on all regions of this nation. And in fact, through the work particularly led by Tone, who you heard from yesterday, internationally, talking and working with brothers and sisters in Latin America, for one example. And then I think the third circle, before I pass it to Lorenzo to share his insights, is this larger network, the movement part of our name, the learning community, that we can come together as we're doing today and expand the circle to advance, grow knowledge and wisdom and understanding. We can share from each other's experiences. We can have conferences, webinars, newsletters, position papers. We can help impact legislation by advancing knowledge and learning. And so this wider learning community, credible messenger learning community, is open to funders, researchers, practitioners, organizations, credible messengers, people perhaps not in an organization, not part of a particular initiative, but who are interested in being part of this process, contributing to this process, so that collectively our knowledge and our practice continues to improve. And so, if, in short, we are an organization that in one sense is very practically on the ground, working to develop actual programs and initiatives, but also wanting to contribute to this wider body of learning, of nurturing the movement, of growing. I think the greatest value perhaps that CM3 may play is helping to connect the dots and connect the awesome, beautiful people who are doing this work around the country and around the world. And that's something that we seek to do, but that we really can only do collectively with all of you in various ways. And that's the beauty of it, that this is a movement, this is a mission, this is a body of work that really is dependent and interdependent on the collective power of the brothers and sisters and the folks coming together to do this work. And that's what CM3 is. And we definitely want to stay and will stay in contact so we can talk more specifically. People may want to connect to this work in various ways. And we want to continue to open the doors and offer avenues and learn from the community. How can we better include and incorporate and grow our team so that we can have more impact? Lorenzo?
Lorenzo.
I think you're muted, bro.
Okay, so let me see if I can recapture that. I said, Brother Lacy, we're gonna kick up some dust, no question. with all the relationships, you know, and the authenticity that is communicated by way of your reputation and commitment to uplifting youngsters, first on the Rock, first in Rikers Island, then now throughout various communities, in particular, New York and DC, of course. We're going to translate all that into some real progress, just like every speaker has encouraged us to do. We do have a one word, you know, it's imperative to have a one sentence, I should say, a mission statement. Y'all saw it dropped in the chat on yesterday. I'll just recite it to you here. The Credible Messenger Mentoring Movement is founded to help transform the lives of justice-involved youth, their families, and the justice systems that impact them by supporting and advancing credible messenger initiatives in communities across the nation. That's our mission. Almost every word of it is very deliberate. You got to use the and in a few places, but almost every word is very deliberate. I'll choose to raise up a couple. Supporting and advancing. Didn't say establishing. We're not coming to communities, you know, with a shingle that we're trying to hang outside. It already sort of incorporates our basic principle about the assets that exist in communities. And so it really is the frame for every activity. You know, development of our national team, a network development, you know, assessments of places where we should go or not go. Connections that we want to make to all the various players in a human service system. Everything is going to kind of go through that sort of conduit whereby there is a presumption about the assets that exist in every community. And so that's quite central. It's very central. It's been stated enough over the past couple of days, but it's difficult to not raise it up again when you kind of concentrate on, okay, now, well, what is the mission? You know, so it's always about trying to scale, right? All the major think tanks and national philanthropies and governments at every level want to talk about how you scale, how you replicate, right? And so it's still not been figured out. Still not been figured out. And one of the reasons is because we've not been able to sustain long-term commitments, because as so many have also said, it just takes time to build, you know, and to, you know, make the progress where families are impacted, and then a project is impacted, and then a community, you know, and then a section of an urban center, perhaps. And then the challenge is inverted when you think about places like Albany, Georgia, or the you know, Delta side in Arkansas, places that I've gone and met youth who are wearing all the effects of our urban youth in these communities. You know, how do you connect and communicate with them? You know, we're going to try to pass along, you know, these great lessons that have been communicated over this 2-day session, and you know, share with folks, you know, the model that has been evaluated and researched and studied by the Urban Institute and by the gentleman who studied the project in DC, David, at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. We're gonna pass along all the lessons to our model. And we're gonna try and engage on those various levels that Clint just delineated. I'm very confident with your help. I'm asking each and every one of you, you know, to carry forth the excitement, the optimism, the conviction, you know, that these efforts work. These efforts work. You know, too many of our elected officials want to come into office and get the mic and try to assemble panels and committees to figure out what works. I submit that we know what works. Incredible messenger mentoring is one of the transformative mentoring is one of those things that works on a system level and an individual level. And so this is what we're going to be trying to do. We're going to be working hard at it every day. You know, there's not a structure to our week or our work days here.
Working around the clock.
There's not a structure to it.
Like everybody else, right, Ren?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I know we're preaching to the choir, and we're so humbled to be part of the choir. So we're about to close, family, for now, and move on until we reconnect, which we definitely will. The last thing I want to say before I pass it to Dana is I'm looking at your faces and I'm looking at you individuals, organizations, and CM3, we hope to grow and we want to make sure our infrastructure is tight, but our greatest value and the way we're going to work is through partnerships with Grow Up, Grow Out, with community connections for youth, right? With LA Youth Uprising, right? With the various organizations in Atlanta, Alabama. I see my brothers and sisters from Orlando. I see my folks from Harris County, Houston, Texas, from Chicago, from Milwaukee. I don't want to leave out a region, you know, Northwest Credible Messengers in Washington doing major things. There's just so many people who are on today and who are represented. And that's how we work. It's going to be collective work, right? That's our whole desire and mission. We're offering ourselves to you and are humbled to work with you. And moving forward, we know we will live up to the words of our great ancestors and the work of our great ancestors who have brought us thus far. So God bless. I'd like to pass it to Dana until we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint. Don't go too far because I'm hoping you can give us our final word, final goodbye anyway. And we want to thank everyone for all of you committing to this 2-day process. We've learned so much about CM3 as well as each other and the role we're going to play in this mission and vision. I often say it and I'll repeat it without any guilt. This is not voluntary work. This is mandatory work. This is must-do work, and we do not have a choice in whether or not we're going to do this work. Our people need saving, and if not us, then who? Each of us have been chosen by assignment, as my master teacher, Julian Johnson, often tells me. So if you are here, you are meant to be here. You are meant to play a role. So master that role, master healing and teaching our villages and our people so that we can truly overcome. And just to wrap us up, it's so interesting that Alabama has a role in the story with Clinton being born in Alabama. Yet my familiarity with Alabama started with another great leader, another great man who started a movement that has carried us to our current times. And that was the civil rights movement. And although that man was born in Georgia, he really planted his seeds and got his start in Montgomery, Alabama. And there's no irony that that place where that movement began is where a seed may have been left behind for another great leader to evolve and carry us forward. And once we lost that leader, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, we really lost our way, and we've been hurting ever since. And a lot of our cities are fixing the buildings that we burned down or tore down in our pain that we now call gentrification. We're fixing the buildings, but we have forgotten about the people. But I'm happy to know that this village has not. We know and understand that our people are hurting. And the only balance to hurt and pain is love. A movement led by love can really heal us from the setbacks of the past and the challenges of the present. So thank you, Clint, for creating a movement that includes all.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for understanding what we need. Thank you for leading with love. Clint, you are what love looks like. So in the spirit of old Russell Simmons, before we say goodbye, please you be the one to bless us with our final goodbyes. And from all of us, we love you and we thank you.
Oh, I love you too, and I'm humbled. And you know, I definitely didn't create it, but I am so humbled to have the opportunity to help push and advance it and connect us, and that's what it's about. So yeah, you know, I love the way Brother Russell would end the show, right? So God bless and good night. Peace.